September 11th, 1649. Drogheda, Ireland. A white flag rises over the battered walls of the city. The garrison commander, Sir Arthur Aston, stands atop the ramparts, waiting to negotiate terms of surrender. Below, Oliver Cromwell watches impassively, his new model army soldiers fidgeting with loaded muskets. The siege has lasted 8 days. Aston begins to speak. "We offer our surrender with—" Cromwell raises his hand, voice clear in the sudden hush. "No mercy. It is God's judgment upon you all." The soldiers surge forward. Aston is dragged down from the walls, his wooden leg torn off. Soldiers beat him to death with it while he screams for mercy. Inside the city, parliamentarian troops hunt down every man in military age. Those who flee to St. Peter's Church are burned alive when soldiers set the building ablaze. The screams last for hours. By nightfall, over 3,500 men, women and children lie dead in the streets. Cromwell writes in his report, "I am persuaded that this is a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches." Today, we're uncovering the forgotten bloodbaths of a war that tore England apart, not just politically, but through systematic slaughter that rivals the worst atrocities in European history. And stay with us until the end, because we'll reveal how the aftermath of this war sparked a wave of revenge killing so brutal that entire villages were wiped out in the name of settling old scores, a bloody epilogue that history textbooks conveniently forget to mention. The English Civil War wasn't confined to England. It spread like a disease to Scotland, Wales, and most bloodily, to Ireland. But nowhere felt the merciless boot of Cromwell's parliamentarian forces more than the town of Drogheda. By September 1649, Oliver Cromwell had already secured his victory in England. King Charles I had been executed earlier that year, his head separated from his body by a single stroke of the executioner's axe. But royalist sentiment still burned in Ireland, where Catholic forces aligned themselves with the king's supporters. Cromwell sailed to Ireland with vengeance in his heart and 12,000 men at his back. Drogheda was his target, a walled town defended by a garrison of about 3,100 men, led by the English royalist Sir Arthur Aston. The siege began on September 3rd. Cromwell's artillery hammered the town's medieval walls for days. On September 11th, the bombardment finally opened 2 breaches. Cromwell demanded surrender, and when Aston refused, parliamentarian troops stormed through the gaps. The initial assault was repelled with heavy losses, enraging Cromwell. When his troops finally broke through on the second attempt, his orders were unequivocal: no quarter. Cromwell's own account describes what happened next. "Our men getting up to them were ordered by me to put them all to the sword, and indeed, being in the heat of action, I forbade them to spare any that were in arms in the town. And that night, they put to the sword about 2,000 men. Royalist officers were executed on the spot, and civilians suspected of supporting the royalist cause were cut down in the streets. Hundreds of residents sought sanctuary in St. Peter's Church, where Cromwell's men barred the doors and set the church ablaze, burning alive everyone inside. According to witnesses, soldiers stacked piles of heads along the streets like winter cabbages. Sir Arthur Aston suffered perhaps the most gruesome fate of all. After surrendering, his wooden leg was taken from him. Contemporary accounts even claim Cromwell's soldiers beat him to death with it, believing there was gold hidden inside. In the aftermath, Cromwell was unapologetic. In letters to Parliament, he justified the massacre as God's will. "I am persuaded that this is a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches, who have imbrued their hands in so much innocent blood." Before we continue with our next massacre, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to tap that subscribe button if you're finding this history eye-opening. There's a lot more dark corners of history we'll be exploring in future videos, and you won't want to miss them. 4 years before Drogheda, another massacre unfolded on English soil. Basing House in Hampshire was one of the most formidable royalist strongholds in southern England, and the home of the Catholic Marquess of Winchester. For nearly 2 years, this massive fortified mansion had withstood multiple sieges, earning the nickname Loyalty House for its steadfast support of King Charles I. By October 1645, it had become a symbol of royalist resistance that the parliamentarians could no longer tolerate. Oliver Cromwell himself arrived to take command of the final siege on October 8, 1645. He brought with him heavy artillery and 7,000 men from his new model army. After a week of bombardment that reduced parts of the outer walls to rubble, Cromwell ordered a pre-dawn attack on October 14th. The parliamentarian soldiers poured through a breach in the walls at 6 a.m., catching many defenders still in their beds. Hugh Peters, a parliamentarian chaplain who witnessed the event, wrote, "The soldiers in the heat of battle refused quarter and put them all to the sword. Around 100 defenders were killed, many still in their nightclothes, and those who surrendered were executed minutes later. The Marquis of Winchester was captured alive, while many of his officers were dragged into the courtyard and shot. Female defenders were stripped naked by the common soldiers before being killed or assaulted. As the massacre continued, the soldiers set fire to the house, burning to death anyone hiding in its cellars or upper rooms. After the massacre, the soldiers stripped the house bare. According to witnesses, they took £200,000 worth of plunder, almost £25 million in today's money. Even the lead from the roof was torn off and sold." Cromwell's report to Parliament made no mention of the massacre's excesses. Instead, he wrote dispassionately, "We have had little loss. Many of the enemy were put to the sword. The few survivors were paraded through the streets of London like animals, to the jeers of parliamentarian supporters. This wasn't just war, it was extermination of political enemies." Before Cromwell's rise to supreme power, Bristol, England's second largest city and most important port, became the site of one of the war's most savage urban battles. The city was held by parliamentarian forces under the command of Colonel Nathaniel Fiennes, but royalist armies led by Prince Rupert of the Rhine, King Charles I's nephew and most aggressive general, had surrounded it. Unlike the other massacre, the bloodbath at Bristol began with a frontal assault. At dawn on July 26, 1643, royalist forces attacked the city from 3 directions simultaneously. The parliamentarians put up fierce resistance, but by midday, royalist soldiers had breached the defences. One witness described it as war at its most terrible. As royalist troops poured into the narrow streets, they showed little distinction between soldier and civilian. Anyone suspected of supporting Parliament was cut down where they stood. In the St. Michael's Hill area, royalist cavalry charged through crowded streets, their horses trampling civilians who couldn't get out of the way fast enough. Bodies piled up in doorways as residents tried to flee the slaughter. Though Colonel Fiennes eventually surrendered the city to prevent further bloodshed, the killing continued for hours afterward. Royalist soldiers, many drunk on looted alcohol, went door to door hunting for parliamentarian sympathisers. One account describes how a group of citizens who took refuge in St. Mary Redcliffe Church were dragged out and executed in the churchyard. A contemporary pamphlet claimed that the gutters ran red with the blood of honest burgesses. Prince Rupert himself tried to stop the worst excesses, hanging several of his own men for rape and murder, but his efforts came too late. One parliamentarian chronicler estimated that beyond the military casualties, upwards of 400 of the townspeople, including women great with child and suckling infants, were put to the sword. Bodies lay unburied in the streets for days, leading to outbreaks of disease that killed even more citizens. The city, once prosperous, was left economically devastated, with many businesses destroyed and warehouses looted. Beyond the high-profile massacres, a more systematic form of slaughter occurred throughout the war, the mass execution of prisoners. In modern warfare, captured enemy soldiers are generally protected by international law. In the English Civil War, such protections didn't exist. At the Battle of Naseby in June 1645, the decisive engagement of the First Civil War, parliamentarian forces under Cromwell routed the King's army. In the aftermath, they captured the royalist baggage train, which included many camp followers, the wives and children of royalist soldiers. What happened next was recorded by parliamentarian officer Richard Baxter. Nearly 100 women, some of them wives of officers of quality, were killed in the pursuit. Cromwell's justification was chilling. He claimed they were Irish whores and therefore legitimate targets, despite many being English wives who had followed their husbands to war. At Hopton Castle in Shropshire in 1644, a small parliamentarian garrison surrendered after a short siege, on the promise of quarter. Once they laid down their arms, Royalist commander Sir Michael Woodhouse ordered all 31 men executed. The commander, Samuel Moore, recorded that several were chopped to pieces while still alive. After the Battle of Philiphaugh in 1645, Covenanter forces, Scottish allies of the English Parliament, captured around 100 Irish royalist soldiers and 300 of their female companions and children. Despite surrendering, the men were shot, while the women and children were drowned in pits. One of the most disturbing accounts comes from Barthamley Church in Cheshire, December 1643. A group of local farmers and villagers took refuge in the church tower, and after surrendering, they were dragged to the churchyard where, according to Parliament's official record, 12 of them were stripped naked and most barbarously murdered. At times, execution was formalised as punishment. After the Siege of Colchester in 1648, two royalist commanders, Sir Charles Lucas and Sir George Lisle, surrendered to Parliamentarian General Thomas Fairfax. Despite being promised quarter, both were court-martialed and executed by firing squad within hours. Just before his execution, Lucas reportedly said to the firing squad, "I have faced your guns many times in battle. They hold no fear for me." After Lucas fell, Lisle embraced his friend's corpse before taking his place against the wall. He called to the firing squad, "Come closer. You missed me in the war. Do not miss me now." When told a soldier was stepping back to avoid being too close, Lisle replied, "I have been nearer to you when you have missed me." What made these killings particularly disturbing wasn't just their number, but their calculated nature. These weren't deaths in the heat of battle, but cold executions of men who had laid down their arms, violating what few rules of war existed at the time. The formal end of the English Civil War didn't bring an end to the killing. Instead, it transformed into something perhaps even more disturbing: systematic revenge. After Charles I's execution in January 1649, England became a republic, the Commonwealth, under Cromwell's eventual leadership, but the wounds of war remained raw, and those who had fought for the king or simply remained loyal to him faced a new kind of terror. In the years following the war, an estimated 10,000 people were killed in politically motivated revenge attacks. These weren't official executions, but vigilante justice carried out by soldiers and civilians alike. In Yorkshire, a band of former parliamentarian soldiers called themselves the Levellers, not to be confused with the political movement of the same name. They roamed the countryside targeting known royalist families. One account describes how they dragged Sir Henry Slingsby, a royalist supporter, from his bed at night. They didn't kill him immediately. Instead, they forced him to watch as they hanged his servants and burned his estate before finally executing him. In Kent, following the failed royalist uprising of 1648, parliamentarian sympathisers compiled black lists of those who had supported the king. Local committees used these lists to identify targets for property confiscation, imprisonment, or worse. One witness described seeing men hanged from apple trees for no crime but loyalty to the late king. The town of Banbury in Oxfordshire saw one of the worst incidents. Former soldiers returning to their homes found them occupied by families who had supported the opposing side. The resulting conflict turned into what one pamphlet called a week of blood, with dozens killed in street fighting that resembled the war itself in miniature. Even religious services became scenes of violence. In Devon, a group of former royalist soldiers interrupted a Christmas service being held by a Puritan congregation. The resulting massacre left 15 worshippers dead. The attackers justified it as revenge for Parliament's ban on traditional Christmas celebrations. What made these post-war killings particularly insidious was their personal nature. Unlike the anonymous violence of battle, these were targeted attacks against known individuals, neighbours killing neighbours in a spiral of revenge that lasted for years. The restoration of the monarchy under Charles II in 1660 didn't end the cycle, it merely reversed it. Now it was parliamentarian supporters who faced retribution. The bodies of Cromwell, Ireton and Bradshaw were dug up from Westminster Abbey, hanged at Tyburn, beheaded, and their heads displayed on spikes at Westminster Hall. In one particularly gruesome case of poetic justice, John Okey, one of the men who had signed Charles I's death warrant, was hunted down in the Netherlands, brought back to England and executed under the restored monarchy. Before his execution, he was forced to watch as the executioner dismembered the corpse of his fellow regicide, Thomas Harrison. The English Civil War wasn't just a battle of ideas or a contest for power, it was a war of massacres, a conflict where mercy became a weakness and cruelty became strategy. And in many ways, the war never truly ended. The massacres evolved into revenge killings, the battles into personal vendettas, the grand clash of armies into the quiet murder of neighbors. The violence that began on the battlefield seeped into the very fabric of society, poisoning communities for generations. The scars of the English Civil War remain visible today, not just in the ruined castles and bullet-marked church walls, but in the sectarian divisions that still haunt parts of the British Isles. The massacres we've discussed today aren't just historical curiosities. They're the dark foundations upon which modern Britain was built. Which of these massacres do you think had the most lasting impact on British history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this journey into the darker side of the English Civil War enlightening, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We'll be exploring more forgotten horrors from history in the coming weeks. Thank you for watching Nefarious History. Before you leave, be sure to subscribe. Until next time, remember that beneath the sanitized version of history we're comfortable with lies a much darker reality, one we'll continue to explore together.